Never before had an American president been assassinated. As the Civil War is over, there were those in the Confederacy who did not want to lose, and they were willing to do whatever it takes. At first, the group of men who were planning the action against Lincoln were only planning to kidnap him. But with the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, the war being over, it was now time to take their plan to the next level, which is to kill the president. But not just the president, kill others and high ranking officials in the U.S. government. So, one last plan was not devised by the leaders of the Confederate Army, but by an actor, the most famous actor in America at the time, John Wilkes Booth. It's hard to imagine today, let's think about our president and just an actor walking in and shooting the president. We would be flabbergasted. We would be shocked if one of our most famous actors from movie or TV were to kill the president. But John Wilkes Booth was the most famous actor in the United States. He hated Lincoln. He wanted the Confederacy to win. When they lost, he was willing to do whatever it takes. His original plan, kidnap Lincoln. But with the war being over, he decides to take the most drastic action. But it's not just him. There are at least three others. Lewis Powell, David Herold, and George Atzerodt are for sure involved in this conspiracy to kill Lincoln, but also to kill the vice president and kill the Secretary of State all at the same time. To kill President Lincoln, Vice President Johnson, and Secretary of State Seward all at the same time. And when John Wilkes Booth finds out that President Lincoln is coming to see a play called Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater on Good Friday, April 14th, 1865, he cannot believe his luck because he knows this theater. They know him and they love him at this theater. He knows every nook and cranny. He has access to every part of the theater. And now Lincoln will be there that night. He knows this play. He knows that it's a comedy. He knows when the laughter will be the loudest from the audience. And it's at that moment will he strike. You could still go to Ford's Theater today. Maybe you've been there. They still do plays. And there's a museum underneath it. But you can see on this slide the stars where Lincoln would have been sitting in the presidential box. Now, John Wilkes Booth, because he had access to Ford's Theater, was able to get in there earlier in the day, make sure that he could get access to the president. He put a little hole in one of the doors leading into the presidential box so he could look and peep through that hole and see where the president was sitting. He devised a way to prop a door closed once he was inside, so in effect locking it so others could not pursue him through that door. And when John Wilkes Booth arrives to kill Lincoln, he's watching the play. He knows when to strike. And at the funniest moment of the play, John Wilkes Booth will come into the presidential box and shoot Lincoln behind the left ear with a low caliber single shot pistol. And Lincoln will fall over, slump over. And at that moment, Mrs. Lincoln doesn't know what's happening, but the John Wilkes Booth will scream the state motto of Virginia, which is Sic Semper Tyrannis, which means thus always to tyrants, meaning this is what happens to wicked kings. You get killed. So John Wilkes Booth sees himself as being a hero, killing the tyrant, Sic Semper Tyrannis. And once this happens, the person who's with President Lincoln at the time, Henry Rathbone, a major in the army, jumps up to try to fight or figure out what was going on and take out the assassin. Well, Booth has to use his arm. He slashes Rathbone in his arm. Booth uses his knife to slash Rathbone's arm really badly. Rathbone falls to the ground. John Wilkes Booth will then jump from the balcony. His spur will catch the bunting there, the flag draped in front of Lincoln, and it'll mess up his jump, and he will break his leg when he hits the stage, and he will hop off, screaming, "The South was avenged." Find his horse outside and begin the journey, he thinks, to the Confederacy, where he will be seen as a hero. At that very same moment, there's in the conspiracy, they're trying to kill the vice president. and the Secretary of State. George Azarat was supposed to kill the vice president. He goes to the hotel where the vice president's staying, but does not go through with it. Lewis Powell, however, does show up at the house of William Seward. Now, William Seward, as Secretary of State, had been involved in a carriage accident. Like, how we have car accidents? William Seward had a carriage accident and was hurt pretty badly. He was in a back and neck brace. So when Lewis Powell comes into the home, his gun misfires. So he can't use his gun, but he has a knife. He jumps on William Seward while he's in bed, starts stabbing him in the chest and neck, trying to kill him, but the blade just keeps hitting the neck brace. He'll run away thinking that he's killed William Seward, and William Seward will be badly cut up and will barely make it, but he does survive the attack. So the only person that dies as a result of this conspiracy is Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth will make his way south. The plan is to meet up with the conspirators, but Lewis Powell does not make it, and only David Herold will meet John Wilkes Booth and begin this southern trek, trying to get away from the army that's going to be chasing him. George Azarat will stay in Washington, D.C., and will be caught a few days later. So will Lewis Powell. David Herold and John Wilkes Booth will ride south from Washington, D.C., and they will go to the Surratt Tavern, and they'll get there around midnight. Apparently, there was a package that John Wilkes Booth had ready for him there to pick up, like with a compass and some goggles and a gun. So he had planned this, and there was some conspiracy theorists who believe that the owner of the Surratt Tavern knew about what was about to happen that day, but John Wilkes Booth gets his extra supplies there and continues to ride on. But remember, he's got a broken leg, so he has to figure out how to get that fixed because he can't just really keep running with a broken leg. There's the tavern where he will pick up some supplies at midnight. He will then remember that he knows Dr. Samuel Mudd, who is a physician in the area. And John Wilkes Booth will go to Samuel Mudd's home and wake him up. Now, there's a lot of controversy whether John Wilkes Booth and Samuel Mudd knew each other. The answer to that is pretty clear. Yes, they did know each other. Samuel Mudd will deny knowing John Wilkes Booth later when the army shows up, but they did know each other. The question is, did Samuel Mudd know that John Wilkes Booth was going to kill Lincoln that night? Maybe. He might have been part of a plan to kidnap Lincoln. Maybe he didn't know so much exactly when Lincoln would be shot, but Mudd certainly and Booth had some interactions. So he'll set his leg and he'll stay there for a little while. And then after Samuel Mudd's home, he'll go to someone named Samuel Cox's home for a little while. And then he'll hide in the woods for several days, which is kind of crazy. He and David Herold will hide in the woods for several days, waiting for things to settle down, trying to get across the Potomac River into Virginia, because right now they're in Maryland. And they don't really know how to get across the river. They cross the river, but they go in the wrong direction and land back in Maryland. But finally, we'll get across the river. On April 23rd, we'll be at a place called the Lucas Farm. And on April 24th and 25th, they will be at the Garrett Farm in Virginia. And it's here at the Garrett Farm that they'll be held up in the barn, and the Army will track them down. The Army's kind of got a plan. They know where they've been, and the Union Army will find them at Garrett's Farm. They will be in the barn. The Army will light the barn on fire, trying to get David Herold and John Wilkes Booth to come out. But remember, John Wilkes Booth still has a broken leg. David Herold will come out. He'll be arrested by the Army. John Wilkes Booth is in the barn while it's on fire. He says he's going to come out. At that moment, a Union soldier named Boston Corbett will shoot John Wilkes Booth through the boards of the barn, in some way killing Booth, severing his spinal cord. He will die as a result of that injury right there at Garrett's Farm. Boston Corbett was told not to shoot, but will get in a little bit of trouble with the Army, but not really, and would become famous as the man who killed Lincoln's assassin. But the others in the case, Lewis Powell, David Herold, George Atzerodt, and even the lady who ran the boarding house where they all met in Washington, D.C., her name is Mary Surratt, the same family that owned the tavern where they picked up supplies at midnight. Mary Surratt would also be arrested. Now, there's really not a lot of evidence today that would point to Mary Surratt knowing what was going on, but the Army back then believed she was involved. And so besides Mary Surratt, the three other men, Lewis Powell, David Herold, and George Atzerodt, would be arrested, and because it was considered wartime, there would be a Army trial, and they would be quickly found guilty of a conspiracy not only to kill Lincoln, but the Vice President and the Secretary of State. Of course, John Wilkes Booth is already dead. Boston Corbett had seen to that, but the Army has a trial. They're found guilty, and they will be executed. They hanged in the summer of 1865. What is interesting about this particular photo here is that you see Mary Surratt being brought out on a really, really hot day by the Army to hang her, but it's considered in bad form to have a lady being exposed to the sun. So an Army soldier will bring her out under a parasol, like an umbrella, to keep her shaded because she's a lady, and then a minute later they will snap her neck and she will be hanged, along with Lewis Powell, David Atzerodt, George Atzerodt, and David Herold. And you can see that they're all executed by the Army without any kind of appeals or whatever. The Army just does what it needs to do during wartime. So Lewis Powell, David Herold, George Atzerodt, and Mary Surratt would be hanged by the Army. And this really is just the craziest of tragedies. Not only is Lincoln killed, but Secretary of State Seward is slashed brutally, and then all of these people would be killed and executed because of their role in the assassination. But the sadness just keeps going. The major who was with President Lincoln in the box, Henry Rathbone, and his wife Clara, who was also there, well, she was his fiancée at the time. Clara Harris was with him in the box when Lincoln was shot. These two will go on to get married, but Rathbone will never ever be able to get past what he had witnessed and carrying the guilt that he should have been able to stop the assassination. So they move to England a little bit later in life. They have some children. Rathbone, just dealing with a lot of mental issues because of his time next to Lincoln at that assassination, turns on his wife, believes that the pictures on the wall are telling him to kill his wife and children. He kills Clara Harris, but before he can kill his children, he's stopped and will spend the rest of his life in an insane asylum. But all of this tragedy, just ripple effect from the Lincoln assassination, the conspiracy, Henry Rathbone, Clara Harris, just an extremely, terribly sad time in American history. And of course, Lincoln was shot, and he would be taken across the street to the Peterson House. They figured that if they took him to the White House, he would die in the journey. He would sit at the Peterson House, lie there all night. Right? He was shot around 10:30 at night, and all night long he clings to life. And the next morning, 7:22 and 10 seconds on April 15th, 1865, Lincoln will die. So April 15th, 7:22 and 10 seconds in the morning, he will die. So all night long he lays there at the Peterson House. Finally, he will pass away. And then, of course, the country has to deal with, what do we do with Lincoln's body? They design a funeral train. They've never had to do this before, right? And it's getting to be warmer. So how do we get Lincoln back to Illinois? But they want to take his body all through some of the Union states that helped win the war. So through Pennsylvania, up to New York City, down through Ohio, up through Indiana and to Chicago, and then down to Springfield, Illinois. And all through the way, they're re-embalming Lincoln, trying to keep him fresh and preserved. They bring his body to Columbus, Ohio. These are some of the photos and art of Lincoln arriving in Columbus. There's a state capitol in the background. This is an actual photo of Lincoln's body being brought to Columbus, Ohio. and they're bringing him into the State House. And all through the way, there was great security and concern because there were people who wanted to steal Lincoln's body. And when they finally get his body back to Springfield, that's where he's laid to rest. But over time, there was some conspiracies to steal his body. So many years later, the federal government of the United States will dig up Lincoln's body, open the casket, show it to his one remaining son, Robert Lincoln, who's an older gentleman by then. Robert Lincoln confirms that it is his father's body. They shut the casket. They bury him down below 8 to 10 feet of concrete so that there will never be any doubt that Lincoln's body is still there. It was never stolen, never held ransom by former Confederates. So if you want to see Lincoln's grave today, you go to Springfield, Illinois, and you go inside the big, giant grave, go down a few feet, and know that Lincoln's body is down probably about 10 feet below this in concrete.